When any new project arrives, you have to look at the climate situation, just like you look at the landscape situation or whatever. I mean, some architects, you get the same result, whatever the climate or wherever the building is. But we like to feel that climate very much shapes our buildings, and the landscape or the setting of the buildings often dictates the shape of the building. One example, for instance, when we did the British Pavilion in Seville, which was based on energy, it's pretty well the hottest city in Europe, Seville. So our idea was to harness the sun to cool the building. So we had solar cells on the roof, louvers with solar cells collecting energy on the roof of the building, and built a solid wall facing west as a complete barrier to the sun and to stabilize the temperature in the building. We sheltered the east and west facades with fabric louvers. So, in fact, we made sure that the sun never actually touched the building at all. It was completely sheltered and protected.
Well, we are living in an era of global warming, climate change. The climate is changing rapidly. We can no longer just rely on the old idea of local climate. Of course, every authentic piece of architecture or city planning is based on a genius loci, on a place, its topography, its history, its people, and its weather. And of course, that is a main factor in designing a building. You cannot design a building from the north and the south, or a building from the south and the north. That doesn't make any sense. But as I'm indicating, with global weather change, we have to really look at other criteria, because we're living in a crisis era. It's an era of a war against the planet Earth. Some have called it the Anthropocene. Every project, I've worked in the north, I worked in the south, in Africa, in the east. Every work has to relate itself deeply to the climate. I'm working in Africa, in Kenya, in Turkana, that has a desert climate. I'm working in Finland, close to the North Pole, that has Nordic European climate. So, of course, every building material, every choice that you make of how to conserve energy, how to make smart buildings that are responsive to the environment, it's a challenge.
Well, my work is ecological architecture. So one of the most major determinants of ecology is climate, because different climates in the world influence the type of species or flora and fauna of that locality. It also, in the same way it influences the flora and fauna, it influences the architecture and human beings as well. Design with climate means you start with passive mode, means improve comfort conditions without engineering. But the next level is what I call mixed mode, in some engineering, not an awful lot of engineering. So that by using mixed mode, there's a technique to extend the mid-seasons, both into the summer and into winter. So in this way, mixed mode is a way of reducing energy consumption of the building. And then, of course, then comes full mode, which is full air conditioning, heating, and so forth. And then after full mode will be what I call productive mode, which is where your building becomes a power station by itself, it generates its own energy. And so climate starts at the baseline.
I think local climate has always influenced buildings, and I would say always has influenced great architecture. The question is the interesting phenomena since the Industrial Revolution is that there's probably like a strand of buildings that have developed, and probably they had their peak in modernism, where buildings could actually ignore the local climate and still be buildings. But today, as we do know, I think all good architecture today must respond to the local climate. The truth is that probably some of us quite enjoy a lot of transparency, which I would always defend, because you want to, you spend so much time indoors, so we want to have glass, but the thermal performance of the glass is always a challenge, and it is a challenge in winter and in summer. I would say that it has shaped most of the project that we've been working on for the last few decades. This constant struggle of, I want to enjoy the great view out, but you have to respond to the climate, and especially, as I say, the sun and the cold nights of wintertime.
Siempre hay que consultar a la naturaleza. De ella recibimos mucha información sobre el clima, la temperatura, el aire, su dirección, su velocidad, el tiempo de insolación o de asoleamiento y cuál debiera ser el mejor emplazamiento. Naturalmente que involucramos una serie de juguetes en computadoras, simuladores, para simular, como lo acabo de decir, simular cómo se está comportando el edificio antes de construirse, adelantarnos a su comportamiento. Esto nos ha permitido desarrollar en la oficina un método propio que le llamamos el método Dynamo, donde prácticamente el inductor se refiere precisamente a toda la información que proviene de la naturaleza, las condiciones del clima. El inducido es la forma arquitectónica, cómo la estamos resolviendo a partir de implementar sistemas pasivos de climatización natural. Y por último, el sistema captador, que es cuando ya estamos involucrando sistemas activos, sistemas mecánicos y, por supuesto, la implementación de energías renovables para la generación de energía.
As you can imagine, I get asked this a lot. In my role as environmental engineer for Foster's, we tend to look at climates all over the world in some of the most unusual places and some quite particular climates. And I think without doubt, I can't imagine a building where we haven't responded, sometimes with form, sometimes with shape. It depends. We've forever looking at ways to harness as much of the climate as we can, and therefore the actual positioning of a building on a site. So it could be as insignificant as orientation, or as significant as actually transforming a form to respond to a certain type of either solar exposure, wind exposure, rain catchment, solar yield from generation. It's always influencing everything we do. So we will always respond, and I always have in my experience of working in environmental design since the beginning, that's been a focus part of my effort.